Hello and welcome to Camp, the Catholic Audiobook in a Month podcast. My name is William Wilson, and today is day 7 of The Practice of the Presence of God by Brother Lawrence. I will be reading the third part of the Ways of Brother Lawrence. First, you will hear about how to find our all in God. This reminds me of St. John of the Cross's famous drawing of the Ascent. You can go to oratepress.com and look in the resources for a free download of that. Next, you'll hear about how Brother Lawrence shows an indifference to living a short or a long life. This reminds me very much of St. Therese, and especially in her last days. Next up, you're going to hear about how Brother Lawrence saw all events of life as the workings of the divine will. This, of course, reminds me of the abandonment to the divine will, and you can go to camp.fm/abandonment for a whole bunch on that. Let's see. He goes on then to an incident where he was asked to choose between heaven and staying to grow in holiness. And so he's not really being asked that. It's kind of a hypothetical. And St. Ignatius of Loyola was asked a similar thing. And his answer was very different than Brother Lawrence's. Both, of course, good. But with St. Ignatius, we see his answer being, well, I would stay and trust in God, whereas Brother Lawrence says he would leave the choice up to God. So either way, I think you're on solid ground. And finally, we're going to hear about how the spiritual life shouldn't be guided by feeling. So that's a really great point. Lots of stuff today. I hope you enjoy it all. Let's get started. We are made for God, and for him alone. He cannot therefore take it ill that we forsake all, even ourselves, to find our all in him. In God we shall see more clearly what we lack than we could in ourselves by all our introspection, which in reality is but the remnant, unexpelled of self-love, which, under the guise of zeal for our own perfection, keeps our gaze down on self instead of raised to God. Brother Lawrence often said that during these 4 years of life, those years of trial, when no one could lift from his soul the burdening sense that he was lost, he had never wavered in his first determination. That instead of vainly attempting to pierce the future, and as vainly dwelling upon the present anguish of mind, as do most troubled souls, he used to console himself with some such thought as this: let what may come of it, however many be the days remaining to me, I will do all things for the love of God. That thus in forgetting self, he had in truth found God. He told me that in his soul he had found that love for the will of God had taken the place of that which a man ordinarily has for his own. In all the events of life, he saw plainly the workings of the divine will. And this kept him in perfect peace, because his mind was stayed on God. When he was told of any great wickedness, he was not a whit surprised. Rather, he would say he marveled not to hear of more, when he considered the baseness into which sin leads a man. That for his part he rose straightway to the throne of God. And, forasmuch as God could remedy such, yet permitted evil for reasons very true and useful in the order of God's providence, he prayed and interceded for the sinner, and having done so, continued in God's peace. One day I remember telling him without any forewarning that a matter of great consequence to him, and one on which he had set his heart and long labored for, could not be carried out, as the superiors had just made up their mind against it. Quite simply, he replied, we must believe they have good reasons for their decisions, and our duty now is to obey and say no more about it. He did so indeed himself, and though he had many occasions to speak of it afterwards, he not so much as opened his mouth thereon. Once when Brother Lawrence was very ill, a man of great sanctity of life came to visit him and asked him which he would choose if God permitted him. whether to live a little longer to grow in holiness or to receive him at once into heaven. The good brother never hesitated. He replied that he would leave the choice to God, that as for himself he had nothing else to do but to wait in peace till God should show him what was his will. This disposition brought him to so great an indifference about everything and to such perfect freedom that it was very like the freedom of the blessed. He had no bias, not a trace of self could one discover in his character, nor of any prejudice arising from those natural attachments which men commonly possess. He was beloved equally of those of the most contrary temperaments. He wished well to all, without respect of persons. Citizen of heaven, nothing could hold him chained to earth. His vision was not bordered by time. From long contemplation of him who is eternal, he had become himself like him. Everything came alike to him, every station, every duty. The good brother found God everywhere, as near when he was at the humblest task as when praying with the community. He found no urgency for retreats, inasmuch as in the common task he met the same God to love and worship as in the stillness of the desert. His one method of going to God and abiding in his presence was to do all for the love of him. It was a matter of no consequence to him whether he was employed on one thing or the other, provided that therein he sought God's glory. It was to him he looked, and not to the work in hand. He knew that the more opposed the task was to his inclination, the greater and more blessed was the love which made him sacrifice his will to God. That the littleness of the work lessened not one whit the value of the offering, for God regards not the greatness of the work, but the love which prompts it. Another quality one marked in Brother Lawrence was his singular firmness of mind, such as in another walk of life one would have called dauntlessness, which gave proof of a noble soul raised far beyond the fear and hope of all that was not God. He marveled at nothing. Nothing astounded him or gave him cause for fear. This stability of soul sprung from the same source as did all his other virtues. The high notion which he had of God revealed in his heart a perfect picture of his Creator in all his sovereign justice and infinite mercy. Resting on this, he was assured that God would never deceive him and would send such things only as were good for him. Forasmuch on his part he was resolved never to grieve him, but to do and suffer all for love of him. One day I asked him who was his director. He answered he had none, and that he believed he needed none, for the rule and office of his state marked out for him his path in outward matters, as the gospel did the obligation of the inner life of loving God with all his heart. That knowing this a director did not seem needful, but he had great want of a confessor. Those who take no other guidance in the spiritual life but their particular dispositions and feelings, who fancy they have nothing more important to do than to examine themselves as to whether they feel devout or not, such can have no stability nor any certain rule, because our dispositions change continually, sometimes owing to our own sloth, sometimes by the ordinance of God, who varies his gifts towards us according to our needs. That's all for today. I hope you enjoyed the reading. Tomorrow I will read the fourth part of The Ways of Brother Lawrence, where you will hear more about Brother Lawrence's faith, abandonment, and practice of God's presence. If you have enjoyed today's podcast, please subscribe, rate, share, and help us grow. Also, please check out oratebooks.com, now featuring The Ways of Mental Prayer by Vital Leaudet, praised by Pope St. Pius X and spiritual leaders across generations. This masterwork guides readers through the transformative journey of prayer, from its foundational practices to its most profound mystical heights. That's ORATE books.com. If you'd like to learn more about us, please visit camp.fm. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you tomorrow.